There was a time I believed prayer could fix anything. That no matter how dark the world became, a man on his knees could still call down light. I clung to that belief the way some men cling to alcohol, or women, or power, because it was all I had. But some things prayer can't reach. I was 32 when I stopped praying. It wasn't because I stopped believing in higher power. It was because I saw something so vile, so far removed from anything sacred that even the silence afterward felt poisoned. I've never spoken about it, not to anyone. And if I'm being honest, I don't expect to be believed now. But that doesn't matter anymore. Belief isn't what haunts me. Memory is. The memory comes in fragments. A cold room. A smell I still can't name, something between candle wax and iron. The sound of chanting, not from a church, but from somewhere deeper, older. And her eyes. Always her eyes. They never blinked. Just stared through me like she already knew I wasn't going to stop any of it. People see men like him, men with money, power, influence, and they assume everything they do is a performance. But what I witnessed that night wasn't for cameras. It wasn't a show. It was real. It was ancient. And I was a part of it. I was brought in as a priest, a vessel of light. But I walked out feeling hollow, as if something had reached into my chest and taken the part of me that used to believe people were still worth saving. It started with a message. A letter. Actually, not an email. Thick paper, heavy ink, no return address. Inside was a name I recognized immediately, one I'd seen in headlines and on stages and flashing across television screens since I was a teenager. The note was short. Just an invitation, written as if it were some kind of spiritual contract. A request for guidance, confidential, discreet, handsomely rewarded. All I had to do was come to a house in Los Angeles and meet a man who, they said, was finally ready to find his way back to God. At the time, I had just left my second parish. There had been disagreements, the kind that don't make it into public records, but leave long shadows in the back offices of the church. I wasn't defrocked, but I was unassigned, a man of the cloth with nowhere to preach. So when the envelope arrived, I read it more than once. And when I finally said yes, it wasn't because I wanted the money. It was because I wanted to feel useful again. They flew me out 2 days later. No commercial ticket, no name on a manifest. A black car picked me up on the runway and drove me through city lights I didn't recognize. The windows were tinted too dark to see through, and the driver didn't speak. I remember checking my watch and realizing I'd been in that car for nearly 40 minutes before it even occurred to me to ask where we were going. I never did. Something about the silence made me feel like I shouldn't. When we arrived, it wasn't at a hotel or a studio. It was a compound. High walls, iron gates, no signage. The kind of place that doesn't exist on Google Maps. As we pulled in, I saw men at the gate with earpieces and suits that didn't look rented. They nodded as the car passed, but never looked inside. That somehow was worse. Inside, everything was pristine. Too pristine. The hallway I was led down smelled faintly of cedar and bleach, and the air was colder than it should have been for Southern California. No one greeted me by name. No one asked for credentials. I was shown to a room with soft lights, white walls, and a chair in the center, the kind of space where secrets are extracted gently, with warmth and silence rather than force. And then he entered. He didn't wear sunglasses or jewelry or even a watch. He looked tired, older than the man I'd seen in music videos or paparazzi photos. But it wasn't just age. It was something else. A weight behind the eyes, like a man who had spent too long smiling for people he didn't trust. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and simply asked, "Do you believe in redemption?" That was our first session. No cameras, no press. Just that question, repeated like it meant more than I realized at the time. I answered yes. Of course I did. I was a priest. It was my job to believe everyone could be saved. He nodded slowly, like he wanted to believe me. And then he said something that didn't make sense until much later. "You'll need to remember that when it's over." When I first saw the name, I thought it was a prank. Some cruel joke from an old seminary friend who still thought I could be pushed off balance with celebrity nonsense. But there it was, written in black ink on thick cream paper that still smelled faintly of tobacco and something older. Sean Combs. I sat with the letter for nearly an hour before reading the second line. It didn't beg. It didn't explain. It didn't even ask. It simply stated that he was ready to begin again and that he had requested me by name. There were no details about payment, location, or duration. Just a flight reservation and a time. I didn't say yes. I just showed up. There's something about rock bottom that makes you easier to summon. You stop asking the right questions. You stop trusting your instincts. And sometimes, when the fall has been slow enough, you don't even realize you've hit the bottom until you look up and there's no light left. At the time, I had been out of formal ministry for months. My last sermon, the one that emptied the pews and turned whispers into silence, had been about wolves in robes, about how power doesn't erase sin, it amplifies it. I wasn't defrocked, but I was pushed. I had become inconvenient. So when that envelope arrived, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know how to explain what I was about to do. Not even to myself. The flight was quiet, very private with no attendants, no distractions. Just a man in black seated near the front who never looked at me, never moved. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was there, to make sure I didn't change my mind midair. We landed somewhere just outside Los Angeles, but not any part of the city I recognized. The air was colder than it should have been for that time of year. The car waiting at the tarmac was unmarked, matty black with windows so dark they seemed to absorb light. The drive was long, winding. At some point I realized we had passed the same curve twice. I knew because I saw the same broken fence post with a red ribbon tied to it not once, but twice. We were looping, intentionally, and I knew it was meant to disorient me. It worked. When we finally arrived, I didn't see the house at first. Just the gate, tall iron, and engraved with a symbol I didn't recognize. Not quite a circle, not quite a crown. Somewhere in between. A guard stepped forward, scanned my face, then nodded without a word. The gates opened. The house was set far back from the road, mostly hidden behind hedges and heavy trees. It wasn't extravagant. It was strategic, the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. I was shown in through a side entrance, not the front, not the service door either. A door meant for people like me, visitors they didn't want seen. Inside, the silence was heavier than any church I'd ever been in. The air was still, controlled, as if even sound had to ask permission to move. And then he entered. He didn't stride in, he didn't perform. He just appeared as if he had always been standing there and I had only just noticed. Dressed simply in dark gray. No chains flashed, just barefoot on cold stone tile. Diddy. But not the version you've seen. Not the charming one. Not the showman. Not the entrepreneur. This version was stripped of all public identity. The man I saw that night had eyes that didn't blink too often, a voice that never needed to raise itself, and a presence that didn't demand the room. It commanded it by doing nothing at all. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, and for a moment, I felt like I'd walked into a confessional I didn't belong in. He led me to a sitting room, minimalist, almost cold. A small fireplace flickered in the corner, but the heat didn't reach far. He motioned for me to sit, then took the chair across from me, arms resting on his knees. "I don't need a priest," he said. "I need a witness." I didn't respond. I didn't even know what that meant. We sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't awkward. It was expectant. Like something was happening in the room that I couldn't hear, but he could. He closed his eyes at one point and whispered something under his breath. I only caught one word: transference. He opened his eyes again and asked a question I haven't stopped hearing since. "Do you think there is ever a Godet ever turns his face on purpose?" I tried to speak. I tried to say something priestly, something polished, something safe. But the words didn't come. because deep down, I was already beginning to understand something that made my stomach turn. This wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about saving a soul. This was a performance, but not for the public. Not for fans or tabloids or headlines. This was something much older, much darker. Something that required silence and witnesses. From that night forward, I was never picked up the same way twice. The cars changed. The drivers changed. The routes changed. But the destination, that house, that man, that presence remained. And so did the questions. He asked if I believed in energy exchange, if I'd ever heard of living altars, if I'd ever studied what innocence meant in ancient rituals. I told him I wasn't that kind of priest. He smiled. That's why it works. By the third visit, I noticed something in the house had changed. The paintings in the hallway were gone, replaced with black canvases that looked empty until you tilted your head. Then faint outlines appeared, from circles to eyes to flames, and several other ritual-like symbols. One night, I brought my holy book with me, just out of instinct. I wasn't going to read it, I just needed to hold it. When he saw it, he didn't get angry. He just stepped closer, touched the cover gently, and said, "You won't need that where we're going." The last time I was flown in, there was no car waiting, just a man standing by the edge of the runway holding a lantern. He didn't speak. He only nodded, turned, and began walking. I followed because I had already come too far to turn around, and because something inside me, something quiet and buried, had begun to whisper a truth I didn't want to face. This wasn't a call to serve. It was a summons to witness. The path wasn't paved, just packed earth, dry and brittle beneath our feet, cracking softly with every step. The man with the lantern never looked back. His pace was slow, steady, as if he knew I wouldn't turn around, no matter how badly I wanted to. The air felt heavier the farther we went. At first, I thought it was the night, but it wasn't night. Not anymore. It was something else. The trees lining the trail were too symmetrical, too still. They didn't move, not even when the wind picked up. As if they were listening, not swaying. We walked in silence for what felt like half an hour, maybe longer. Time slips when you're walking towards something you can't name, but know will mark you forever. Eventually, the ground began to slope downward. Subtly, at first, then more sharply. That's when I saw it. A structure, half buried in the hill, like it had been swallowed by the earth on purpose. Stone walls choked with ivy. No windows. One door rusted wide and breathing heat like an oven. My feet stopped before my mind did. The man with the lantern paused, turned toward the door, and said the only words I'd hear from him that night, "He's waiting." The door opened on its own. What hit me first wasn't the sight, it was the smell. Damp stone wax, and something else, something organic, metallic, thick enough to taste. Like rusted iron cooked too long in still water. I didn't recognize it then. I do now. The hallway beyond the door was narrow and curved. I could only see a few feet ahead. Walls pressed in on both sides, carved with marks I couldn't read, not letters, not symbols. Scratches layered over time, like desperate messages left by hands that no longer remembered how to write. Every few feet, a candle flickered in a small iron dish. The flames were too blue. They didn't warm the air. They only lit the path like whispers in the dark, just enough to make sure I saw everything I wished I hadn't. I walked deeper. The walls began to sweat. That's the only way I can describe it. Cold drops formed on the stone, dripping without sound. My collar clung to my neck, soaked with fear. I tried to pray silently to myself. But something in that corridor was listening, not just hearing, listening, like it knew my God, and had already outlived him. I turned a corner and found myself at the top of a staircase, wide, shallow, descending into complete blackness. No guardrails, no end in sight, but beneath the silence I heard it, a rhythm, low, subtle, like breath, but it wasn't mine. With each step down, the air thickened. The lights disappeared behind me, one by one, as if being swallowed whole. I don't remember when I passed the threshold from hesitation into surrender. I just know I didn't stop walking. Then the chamber, It opened suddenly, like the throat of something ancient. I wasn't prepared. The space was massive, carved into the earth like a wound that never healed. Dozens of candles lined the circular walls, and in the center stood a raised platform of dark stone, and on it, him. Diddy stood robed in crimson, barefoot, motionless, his head bowed. Around him, others gathered, faces covered, robes of different shades, white, black, deep green. One by one, they turned toward me as I entered, not with surprise, not even with curiosity, but with recognition, as if I had been expected not just tonight, but from the beginning. None of them spoke, not at first. I felt my knees go weak, my mouth dry. The stone beneath me vibrated not from machinery, but from sound moving beneath the surface. A chant. Too low to hear clearly, but enough to make my teeth hurt. Then Diddy raised his head, and he smiled. That smile wasn't the one people know. It wasn't slick or showman-like. It was slow, wide, honest, because he was finally home. You came, he said, voice calm, reverent. I tried to ask what this was, why I was here, but the words caught. My throat burned, not from dryness, but as if something inside me refused to let the truth leave my mouth. He stepped down from the platform and motioned toward a basin, large, ancient, carved from something black and glistening. I don't know what was inside, but when I looked into it, I didn't see my reflection. I saw a child, standing in a room I didn't recognize, looking back at me like I had failed her before she was ever born. Then the chanting stopped all at once, not like they paused, like they were silenced. Diddy turned toward the others and lifted a hand. They must see it, he said. Through him, I should have run. But my feet felt nailed to the stone, and somewhere deep inside, I realized this was never about saving him. It was about preparing me. I thought the worst part would be the blood, but it wasn't. It was the stillness, the unbearable, deliberate stillness of everyone in that room, as if they were standing on holy ground, too sacred to disturb. Except this wasn't holy. Not in any world I'd ever known. It was hollow, and what filled it wasn't reverence. It was hunger, cold and quiet. The platform in the center was now surrounded. The robed figures had taken positions around it, evenly spaced, unmoving. It looked rehearsed. No instructions, no confusion. Just an unspoken choreography, like they'd done this too many times to need words anymore. Diddy stood at the center, still barefoot, still watching me. His face held no cruelty, no tension. But that's what made it worse. He looked peaceful, as if what was about to happen wasn't darkness. It was order, routine, a responsibility. From the far side of the chamber, a door opened. Two figures emerged, dragging something behind them. I didn't see her at first, not clearly. My eyes refused to make sense of it. But as they stepped into the candlelight, I saw the small feet, the pale legs, the soft fabric of a dress clinging to trembling skin. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't crying. She was waiting. That's when I understood the worst part. She had done this before. They lifted her gently, almost with care, and placed her on the stone table in the center. No one spoke. No one moved. The candles around her flickered once, as if inhaling what was left of her hope. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stop them. But I didn't move, because in that moment I wasn't a priest. I wasn't a man. I was a witness, and that's all they needed me to be. Diddy turned to me. There are things that cannot be built without offering, he said softly. His hand moved to his chest, fingers pressed flat against his robe. You of all people should understand that. I shook my head. I don't know if he saw it. My whole body felt numb. He gestured to one of the masked men, who stepped forward and placed something in my hands. Heavy, wrapped in black cloth. When I peeled it back, I saw a book. Old, bound in cracked leather, with a cover that pulsed faintly under my fingers. Inside, the text wasn't English. Not Latin either. The letters moved, shifted. Every time I tried to read, they reshaped themselves into something I almost understood. Just enough to pull me deeper, but never enough to escape. Diddy spoke again. You will read, or the silence will claim her. I looked at the girl. She was staring straight at me. Her eyes held no panic, just resignation. Like she had already seen this ending and accepted it. Like she had seen me before and knew I would fail again. My hands shook as I opened the book. My mouth moved before my mind could catch up. I wasn't reading. I was being pulled through the words. As if something in the pages had found a home inside me, and it was speaking itself out loud through my voice. And then the chanting began again. Not loud, not wild. Low, unified. Like the hum of a machine buried under the earth, grinding slowly through centuries of dust and bone. The girl lay still. Her eyes never closed. The words spilled from me in a voice that didn't feel like mine. And with each line, I felt something leave me, some thread I couldn't get back. The walls began to shift. The stone pulsed underfoot. One of the candles shattered, not from flame, but from something passing through it. And then the light changed, not brighter, not darker, just wrong. The kind of light you only see in dreams that wake you up sweating, heart pounding, unable to breathe. That's when I heard it, not her scream, not her breath, but her voice. Inside my head, don't look away. And I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. This ritual didn't require her. It required me. She was the vessel, but I was the gate. I thought the silence would bring peace. That once I left that chamber, once I put enough miles between myself and what I witnessed, the weight would lift. It didn't. It grew. Not in sound, but in presence, like something that had latched onto me. That night didn't need words to be heard. It began 3 days after I returned. The first mark appeared below my collarbone. I hadn't noticed it at first. Just a mild ache, like a healing bruise. But when I stood shirtless in front of the mirror, I saw the scaring, clean, precise, and deliberate. A circle. Inside it, an open eye, burned into my skin without breaking it. The exact symbol from that night. No blood, no swelling. Just a message. I wasn't a guest. I was part of it now. I tried to ignore it, but the signs didn't stop. That week, I passed a billboard downtown, an ad for a new perfume launch. But it wasn't the model that held me. It was the pose. One hand over her heart, fingers bent inward, the same gesture Diddy had made just before the chanting began. Coincidence. I told myself so, until it kept happening. In interviews, artists I once admired began repeating phrases I'd only heard in the ritual. The flame gives without taking. Everything I lost was meant to be given. One even wore a black robe during a live performance, with that same thorn circle stitched into the hem. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody blinked. Because that's how the ritual survives, not in secrecy, but in saturation. The more it's shown, the less it shocks. The less it shocks, the deeper it embeds. I attended a private mass in Midtown, a last attempt to feel something like safety. The priest stepped up to the pulpit, and for a moment, I thought I was dreaming. There, carved into the front of the altar, barely visible under the lacquer, was that same circle. Fainter, older, but unmistakable. He opened the homily with a passage I'd never heard in scripture. I looked around. No one reacted. Maybe they couldn't see it. Or maybe they could. The realization came slowly that the ritual wasn't an isolated event. It wasn't something you're invited to, like a party. It's something you're absorbed into, quietly, permanently, through symbols, through silence, through roles you didn't realize you'd agreed to, and it spreads through the most unsuspecting places. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the girl's voice again, not crying, not screaming, just whispering. Not in words, but in pulses, like her presence was woven through my blood now. Every beat of my heart, hers. I left the lights on. I thought that would help. But around 3 a.m., all of them flickered at once. Not off, not out, just pulsing, like they were breathing with me. On instinct, I stepped outside for air. The streets were empty, quiet. Then I saw him, a man across the street, dressed in black, standing still, staring, not moving. He raised his hand slowly, just high enough to reveal his palm, and burned into the center, not tattooed, but branded, was that same eye. He didn't wave. He didn't approach. He just mouthed a sentence I didn't hear, but understood anyway. We'll see you now. I didn't go back inside. not for hours. The next day, I tried to delete everything, the letters, the notes, the research I'd started mapping out. The hard drive failed. My computer restarted in a loop. My phone began playing static every time I tried to record a voice memo. But the most terrifying moment came when I pulled my Bible from the shelf. It opened on its own to a page I didn't recognize. The words were twisted, wrong. Whole verses replaced with symbols, the ink still wet. The book had changed. And I knew then, finally and fully, they weren't just watching me, they were preparing me. Because in their world, a witness doesn't walk away unchanged. A witness becomes a vessel, a priest, not the kind who saves souls, but the kind who binds them. The worst part wasn't what they did that night, it's what they keep doing. I used to tell myself it was over, teeth that I had been used for one purpose, discarded and left to rot. But that illusion shattered the night I turned on the TV. It was an awards show, the kind you don't watch for the awards. Big production, global audience. The kind of night where stars wear symbolism like it's kosher. The headliner performed under blood, red lights, surrounded by masked dancers in long black robes. At the climax, the lights dimmed, and a flaming circle appeared behind her, burning, turning, and closing around an open eye projected in the center. The crowd roared. Commentators called it iconic. I sat in silence, the remote heavy in my hand. It was the same symbol, exactly the same. I began to see it everywhere, on album covers, in fashion campaigns, in photo shoots where the models posed with fingers twisted in the same gesture I'd seen Diddy make before the offering. I scrolled social media and saw fans replicating it, hashtagging it as a trend. But it's not a trend, it's a trail. A breadcrumb path leading straight back to the chamber beneath the hill. The industry doesn't hide its rituals anymore. It broadcasts them. I walked into a record store one afternoon, out of curiosity, not hope, and saw a vinyl on display. The cover was pure black, except for a faint image, a child kneeling in a stone circle. No title, no artist listed, just one sticker in the corner, limited pressing. Only for the worthy. I asked the clerk who made it. He looked at me strangely and said, "It's not meant to be played." The pieces were aligning, slowly, horrifically. Every time a scandal breaks, an arrest, a breakdown, a mysterious death, it's followed by a release, a comeback, a chart surge. Another artist rises while another falls. And beneath it all, the same circle spins. People talk about selling your soul, like it's a metaphor. It isn't, it's a process. It's an economy. It's a machine with its own clock and calendar. I traced back Diddy's major milestones, his biggest business deals, his spiritual rebrands. They all lined up with disappearances, not from headlines, from life. People in his circle who were there, then gone, no noise, no goodbye, just vanished like stagehands who finished their cue. And it's not just music, politics, media, faith. I once watched a televised sermon from a mega preacher who laid hands on a child mid-stage and whispered something I couldn't hear, but the girl's reaction was instant. She froze, stiff, and then slowly turned her eyes toward the camera, expression hollow. Behind them, in the stained glass window, I saw it again, the eye. Same shape, same thorns, same silence. The ritual never ended. Now I hear the hum everywhere, beneath advertisements, behind stage music, layered under crowd applause. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. A rhythm like breath, like whispering dirt, like the underground still breathing, even in the light. They call it performance art, they call it branding, they call it event guard. But I've seen the source, and I know better. The girl still visits me, not in dreams anymore, but in reflections, in windows, in puddles. She never speaks, but she always stares. Sometimes her mouth moves, just one word over and over. Again, I've tried to warn others, quietly, through symbols, through conversations. But I see it in their eyes, they already know. Or they're pretending not to. And pretending is safer, because knowing makes you responsible, and speaking makes you disappear. I used to believe that bearing witness was holy, that if you stood in front of evil and refused to look away, God would bless you for it. But I was wrong. Witnesses don't get blessings, they get used, they get stained. And when they try to speak, they're told it was just a dream, or a breakdown, or an overreaction to grief. But what happened wasn't grief, it wasn't madness. It was instruction. I don't pray anymore. Not because I don't want to. Because I don't know who's listening, or worse, who might answer. Every attempt I've made to forget has failed. Every candle I light burns in strange rhythms. Once, I saw the wax form her name, not in my language, but in the script from the book they gave me. The book I no longer own. The one that still appears in my dreams. I'm not recording this to warn you. Warnings are for people who still have a way out. This is something else. This is a marking. They want you to believe the story is closed, that whatever happened, happened long ago. But it didn't. It's still happening. The rituals are still running. The altars are being rebuilt in places you've walked through. Offices, churches, award shows, private islands. They don't hide behind masks. They hide behind excellence. And every time you stream the moment, the performance, the breakdown, the mysterious death, you feed it. You feed them. If I disappear after this, don't ask where I went. I was already gone the moment I spoke the last word from that book. This video, this message, this voice you're hearing, it's not entirely mine anymore. So I'm going to stop here, not because I'm finished. Because she's standing behind me again, waiting. If this story unsettled you, if it made you think twice about what we see and what we don't, go ahead and like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes the only way to break the silence is to make sure it's heard